Thanks, Hsien. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dylan Ang, and those were the key highlights of Prime Minister Hsien Loong's National Day rally speech. But what do the announcements today mean for Singaporeans? Joining me now to take a closer look at his speech is senior political correspondent Grace Ho. Welcome, Grace. Now let's dive right in. Now, Grace, you know the National Day rally, right, is seen as the most important political speech of the year, and it's held annually except for last year when it was called off due to COVID-19. But how different is this rally compared to previous years, and is there anything particularly surprising about this?
Okay, well, thank you, Dylan. I think to set the broad context, the National Day rally speech is used by the Prime Minister to address the country on key issues and challenges, to make maybe major policy announcements on the economy and future plans, and even the country's achievements. But as you rightly pointed out, last year it was cancelled and replaced by a major speech which the Prime Minister gave in Parliament instead. But this year we're back to the usual schedule. It's just that, because of the pandemic, it's still a scaled back hybrid version, with some audience in the studio and some on Zoom. What's surprising for me is that, there was no talk about what's going on in the world this year, or any lengthy exposition about COVID-19, which maybe some people might have expected in the pandemic. But these are issues which have been covered extensively at various platforms, in various speeches by cabinet members, including the Prime Minister himself. So it's good that the speech really cut to the chase and focused on concrete measures that will be taken going forward. The second surprising thing perhaps is in the context of, many Singaporeans tuning into the rally, thinking that there will be, goodies, or big announcements, or, new projects like Greater Southern Waterfront, for example, some time ago. But this year, the Prime Minister in his speech scaled all of that down, into a more sort of intimate, scale, and he addressed, head-on what Singaporeans feel and what they fear. And a lot of it has to be seen in the context of the pandemic because, with it having dragged on for nearly 2 years now, anxieties are running high among some Singaporeans in terms of job security or access to opportunities, whether their employers are perhaps giving jobs to foreigners from other countries. And so, the Prime Minister then explicitly mentioned how, although most Singaporeans do understand the economic argument for having foreign workers here, but there are personal and emotional considerations that affect, their lived experiences. So I think that's where, qualitatively, there is something a little bit different about this year's speech. Yeah.
Okay, but Grace, let's drill down, to the three key areas of Mr. Lee's speech. He mentioned a lot of things, but I think three key areas that we like to focus on would be low wage workers for one, foreigners in Singapore, as well as race relations. Let's start with what he said about low wage workers. What stands out for you?
Okay, I think broadly, these three issues, they're not new in that sense. They have been vigorously debated at length in Parliament. How do you best address the situation for low-wage workers in a targeted but effective way, for example. But for low-wage workers, I think the expansion of the progressive wage model to many more sectors, for one, and also the requirement for companies which hire foreign workers to pay all their local employees, at least the local qualifying salary, which wasn't the case previously. And in terms of foreigners, the specific point about giving Singapore's employment watchdog, TAFEP, more teeth legislatively by enshrining what are existing guidelines into law. Labour MPs and even opposition members have for a long time argued that moral suasion and putting some of these recalcitrant companies on the watch list may not be enough. And so finally you're seeing a lot of that coming into fruition. Race and religion, again tying back to COVID-19 insecurities, you've seen a lot of that manifested in racist behaviour, even physical assaults. And so the Prime Minister is trying to address that in a very concrete way by passing specific legislation through a Maintenance of Racial Harmony Act, which will collect together in one place all the government's powers to deal with racial issues. And of course, another major announcement that starting in November, Muslim nurses in the public healthcare sector will be allowed to wear tudung with their uniforms if they wish to.
Do you think, Prime Minister Lee's announcements today, would they move the needle, so to say, for Singapore, for these rather thorny issues?
Absolutely. I think you see it in the structure of the speech. There's no fat in it. It cuts to the chase in terms of the issues which have taken on greater urgency and have also kind of bubbled to the surface because of the pandemic. Whichever way you look at it, these are the key issues which have gained momentum and traction over the past 1.5 years. We've heard about race and religion from, for example, the Home Affairs and Law Minister, and through various forums organized by the Straits Times, and other, interreligious organizations as well. We've heard about the economy from the Finance and Trade and Industry Ministers, and, 4G leaders. And Singaporeans themselves have taken, online and offline, to air their unhappiness. But, the culmination at the end of this year is this speech by the Prime Minister himself, which draws together all the different threats, all the different issues, and sets out measures that will be taken. So that really sets a baseline, it sets a concrete floor to some of these concerns by the public. But at the same time, he also takes pains to caution that whatever Singapore does has to be adjusted based on its own needs and not what other countries do, especially on issues of race and religion, which will always be sensitive. And then finally also telling Singaporeans that, it takes two hands to clap, right? So yes, foreigners have to play their part in integrating into society here, but Singaporeans must also, welcome them and understand, why they are needed, in order to shore up our economy. So yes, I think it's definitely helped to clear the air, on some of these thorny issues, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Now, we've spoken a lot about what PM Lee said in his speech, but what about what he didn't say? What's missing from his speech that perhaps stood out for you?
Well, over the past year, there's been much talk of political succession, and which 4G leaders is going to step up to be the next PM in waiting. But then again, whether or not this is the appropriate platform to address the issue, is subjective. But the Prime Minister had earlier agreed to stay on until such a time when the new 4G leader is chosen and ready to take over, and the next general election has to be held by 2025. So that's a question that can be answered further down.
Well, thank you very much, Grace, once again for your insights. That was the Straits Times senior political correspondent, Grace Ho, on this year's National Day rally.